at the time when you entered this field, what was the status at that moment about, well, cultural sensitivity and the study field of culture?
Well, there had been a period that the study of culture was quite close to psychoanalysis. There was the Jungian way of looking at cultures. There were these deep unconscious feelings which would influence it. And the distinction between individuals and cultures wasn't very strong. There is a statement of Ruth Benedict. Ruth Benedict was one of the pioneer women of anthropology, that culture was personality writ large, written in large letters. Personality writ large. And that is something which now I would say I don't agree at all. There is a difference. Culture is made up of the interaction of personality, and that's precisely what it is. That's precisely the essence of it. But there was this tendency of looking at culture in terms of personality, and personality very much in a psychoanalytic style. Now, psychoanalysis got less popular, I would say, in the 1970s about. And the new interest in culture started in the 1980s, and then this old line of study had disappeared. And well, the new line of study was ready to use more rigid approaches to study. The same is true for personality. It's the time that the new personality test, the so-called Big Five, got into the use, which is much more research-based than the old theories, which were very much desk chair dreamt fantasies, I would say.
Yeah. Almost intuitive.
Intuitive, which means they tell a lot about the personality of the people who made them, but we are not yet sure how much they tell about the world outside.
Yeah.
I have worked for a full year in, factory jobs, and also the most interesting one, I was an assistant ship's engineer on a ship sailing to Indonesia and back.
Oh, right.
I was a sailor. And that was a great experience. That was certainly an intercultural experience.
Yeah. Was that after the war itself, your second real cultural experience?
Yeah, there were a number of that. I think my most striking intercultural experience was that after I came back from this trip to Indonesia, I met a English girl who was with her family. She was on vacation in Holland, and we became friends, and I stayed with them for some weeks in London, and that was, I think, my first intercultural experience, that being in a family in a different place where you would assume that London would be very much like life in London, very much like life in Holland. Well, it was not at all. So I had my first culture shock then.
How did that feel for you, that culture shock? What did you experience?
I felt stupid. I did things which I thought were the right things to do, but then I discovered that in this environment they were not the right things to do. And I felt stupid, and well, it wasn't so bad. I mean, it was also very interesting, but it was very different from what I had expected. Let me put it that way. And there were many opinions. For example, people said Germans were authoritarian, and French were also authoritarian. But what they did not realize is that the source of authoritarianness in Germany is very different from the source of authoritarianism in France. And this was precisely the things which I found out, which I saw in the answers I got. I would get very different answers from German people than I got from French people.
But this was not necessarily what you were looking for.
Of course not.
Yeah.
Of course not. It's always, you know, the word serendipity. Serendipity is finding what you have not been looking for. Yes, no, I found things that were new. Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember a distinct moment in time, maybe a minute or an hour or a day, when you think, now it dawned on me, there's a pattern that wasn't visible before?
No, it went slowly. It went slowly. And another thing was that I wasn't only analyzing answers in questionnaires, I knew these people. I moved around. I had my contacts in France and in Germany. And as a Dutch person, I had the advantage of having learned my languages. So I could speak with the Germans in German, I could speak with the French in French, and that made a lot of difference. So language also played a role in this. Like I'm gifted with linguistic skills, and that did help a lot in analyzing things, understanding how people can have different frames of minds, and language plays an important role in that too.
How do you see this role? There's often been presumed a kind of a status difference between the researchers on a high pedestal and, well, just applicants in using the researchers' findings to use them in practical life. Do you feel that difference in status?
To say the eye of the beholder, and I think we need both. And it's obviously so that the researchers often have more years of study, and that gives them a certain status. On the other hand, they also have sometimes the image of being rather one-sided, blinkers focused, and not really people of the real world. But I think both roles are necessary. If you grew up in France, you get a different mental programs in your mind than if you grew up in Germany. And in that respect, you are not equal. And you benefit enormously by understanding the difference. And you can even enjoy doing things together, realizing that one person is better at some things, another person is better at other things. Misunderstandings tend to be arising in certain areas, and if you expect those of you know it, you can even laugh about them. You can say, okay, now let's realize that this is exactly what we could predict. That IBM had very much an ethos of equality, of equal treatment of everybody. And I use data of all things from IBM to show that people were not equal, that people had different mindsets and so on. And that was ideologically, I would say, was politically incorrect. Let me put it that. I had a politically incorrect message. And IBM has made very little use of my work, almost none. It's also related to the spirit of the times. The first dimension that came to my attention was power distance. Now I was working on this research in between, say, 1965 and 1980. But you remember the year 1968? The French Revolution at the time, and everywhere the student revolutions. Power was a very hot issue at the time. So which meant that in our questionnaires we had many questions related to power and leadership and influence and so on. So they were jumping out of the questionnaires. What was not so evident, because it wasn't popular at the time, was another side, which was structure. And structure is related to the dimension of uncertainty avoidance. But that came secondary because there were certain differences I could simply not explain by those power questions. And then I started to look for things that related to each other, and I came up with this dimension, which is different, but which in the beginning wasn't evident to us, and therefore also we had far fewer questions about it. We simply didn't. You ask questions about things you're interested in. You predict more or less what you want to find by the questions you ask. So, and the other two dimensions
so the second dimension, uncertainty avoidance, came from the things you couldn't explain
exactly,
with the power distance.
With the power distance, yes, yes.
And is that the way it went with all dimensions?
Well, the other two came together, it's individualism and masculinity, because they are two factors coming out of the same set of questions. And that was by a time I had become a little bit more knowledgeable about the way you analyze data. I also went through a process of learning the statistics, I would say. Getting smart in statistics, and the big discovery was that if you analyze data, the mean scores for countries, you get a different result than if you analyze the individual scores of individuals. The masculine countries have much more taboos about sex and about looking at things that are related to sex. You can look at the different campaigns against AIDS in America and in France, for example, or in Holland. It's much easier in those feminine countries to call things by their name. And in some of those masculine countries, you cannot do this. You're not even allowed to give free information. One of the extremes of masculine and feminine in the United States is that the contraception pill is not part of the health insurance, but Viagra is.
That's pretty illustrative.
That's pretty illustrative, yeah. Yeah. The reception was very varied. There were, I got very encouraging reactions from some people. I got also very disparaging reactions from others. I remember one case where I was extremely happy. In the, it must have been in the early 80s, I got into contact with some people of the Club of Rome. You know, this was the people who discovered the environmental problems in the world. And I met one of the authors of the Club of Rome report, Donella Meadows, female American scientist. And she had read my book, and she was extremely interested in this dimension of masculinity, femininity. Now this was taboo, but to her, this was the essence of one of the things, the essence of why there were the environmental problems. This was related also to this masculine and feminine role. And that was very encouraging to me.
Yeah. Another
person I got a very rewarding contact with is a man from genetics. His name is Luca Cavalli-Sforza. Cavalli-Sforza is an Italian who works in Stanford in the United States. He worked in Italy before. And he is the person who has discovered the way the human genes have spread over the world. The history of mankind all the way from Africa. And he is really anticipated the basis for that. And I got into contact with Cavalli Sforza through correspondence because he was interested not only in the spreading of genes, but also in the spreading of languages and the spreading of cultures. And then he had discovered my work, and I had discovered his work. So actually we got together, we exchanged books and so, and those are very rewarding contacts, because you understand, here are people who do important work, and they take serious what I'm doing, so I must also be doing important work.
Is there a conceivable limit to the number of dimensions, or is it as soon as you find a new correlation, add one?
Well, it must of course not be covered by the others, and I think it becomes more and more difficult to find new aspects that are not covered by the others. And there is also, and the limit is not so much set by the outside world, the limit is set by our minds.
I would like you to take you to one extra dimension, which is the future. Can you give an idea? We live in quite turbulent times at the moment. Can you give an idea where you would expect your field of study to go next? What are the very promising developments? What is the use of the intercultural competence, for instance, intercultural mindset?
Yeah, well, one interesting development is at the end of our new book, and is the link of the cultural dimensions to evolution, to the evolution of societies, and the fact that different societies evolve into different cultures. This is the year of Darwinism, and this is not only a matter of how animals and plants and man develops, but it's also a matter of how societies develop.
Isn't that exactly what people shouldn't do? Apply the cultural dimensions to individuals instead of to societies?
Well, the difference is visible in the societies, but it is in the mental programming. It's the idea of Montesquieu that the laws should correspond to the mindset, and it is so. The institutions in a society are response to the mindsets of the people, and the institutions lead to continuating the mindset. But the mindset doesn't mean that everybody is the same. The mindset means that everybody has undergone the same influences. That's a different story.
Let's say 21-year-old student of ours is suddenly fascinated by what you have written. Is there a course you would advise him to take? Go west, young man.
Go to another culture and keep a diary. And express his feelings also. Not only what he sees, but also what he feels, how it feels. Get hands-on experience.
Become intercultural competent?
At least become interculturally curious. Whether it become competent is to be seen, because that's in the eyes. Well, it's the others who have to decide on that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hofstede.